Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are we doing today? Good gravy. Now, welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica. I am Jessica. If you are new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. Good to see you. Good to have you. Glad you're here. Now, goodness, this video has been so difficult to make. I have tried at this particular video about 3 times now. Okay. Life and family and kids and dogs and all the things have just gotten in the way. So this is attempt number 3. 3, okay? So this is a little bit different. I try to do my reactions as genuine as possible. So I try not to watch them ahead of time to get the best reaction as possible. However, I have seen this particular video almost 3 times. So, now, given the fact that it has been 2 times with lots of interruptions, and I've chosen to try to do it again for this 3rd time and make it better, we'll see. Anyway, this is the trial that I've been doing this time around. It is Nicole Nachtman. She is on trial for the murder of her mom and stepfather. She is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in their deaths. We are currently in the defense's case in chief. They are putting on their defense for her and going with the idea that she was in basically not in the right frame of mind, and she should be not guilty by reason of insanity in the death of her mother. Not really sure where they're going in the death of the stepfather. I guess probably the same, but they haven't really said anything. They're not really focusing on him necessarily just yet. But yeah, so we're talking with one of the doctors right now. She's going to get into the diagnosis that she gave her, which again, I've seen it already. Don't necessarily agree with it. There's some holes in it. But again, I'm not an expert. I do not claim to have a expert degree in any of this stuff. So I do not, none of this is for with an expert. This dog is over here doing some things. But we're going to ignore it. But if you get some education out of this, that's great. If you get some, if you get some learning out of it, that's great. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a mental health expert. I've worked in the mental health field for the last 10 years. I do have a criminal justice background degree. But, I just do this for the commentary, and maybe I do have some insight on some things. But I really just kind of do this just to kind of, talk with the people about what maybe things that they see and their comments and how maybe people feel about it. And feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. And obviously like and subscribe as well. Those are very much appreciated. And yeah, so we're going to get going with that. And we're going to add it here and we're just going to go. We're going to jump right in.
You ready? Ms. Mercier, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
We get this ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, Doctor, let's go ahead and
Okay.
get the, your stand up.
Stand, yeah,
You don't have to.
But
You'll
then
let us know.
yeah.
Jury is presently seated. Everyone else may be seated at this time, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Welcome back. My first question is, did anybody have any exposure to the case outside of the courtroom or discuss the case amongst yourselves with anyone else or do any research related to the case by show of hands? All right, let the record reflect no hands. I hope everyone had a nice lunch. We're going to pick up where we left off, continuation of the direct. First, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Hi, Dr. Heidi.
Hi, Mrs. Herschel.
I think where we left off, we were discussing instances, both in the record, witness accounts, and by Nicole, of the psychological abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
ask you just a clarification question. You had mentioned before the break a graduation incident that dealt with a comment that she was an overweight skank or something. Were there two separate instances, one at a mall involving overweight and then one at graduation involving how she was dressed, if you remember?
Was there one at a mall? There was an incident at a mall, but the one I'm thinking about wasn't specifically about her weight. Now, the one that you asked me about, the overweight stank, that was at graduation.
Okay.
And
What,
there
if any
was-
other
yeah.
instances of psychological abuse did you reference with regard to either in the records or something Nicole reported to you?
And Counselor, just move this a minute. If I'm able to quote from Joe's clinical interview with me, he said his mom's way of motivating people was to point out your flaws. So that is certainly consistent with psychological abuse. And then another example, and this is partly why Nicole is, as I would say, is immature, underdeveloped, is that she wasn't allowed to grow up or to individuate. So what with kids, when they get into adolescence, they test boundaries, they want to become their own person. And Nicole was not allowed to, or at least her mother had a great deal of input in terms of how she dressed, also about her major when she got to college. And what Joey related, and certainly consistent with what Nicole said to me, was that she didn't have the ability to stand up to her mother. So her mom is not allowing her to become her own person, to individuate. So she basically gets into this thing, or this pattern basically of doing whatever, like a child, doing what her mom said, basically not growing up, not questioning, not making waves. She is desperately seeking her mother's approval. And the sad thing is that she can't ever seem to get that. She's always, as she said, she's never good enough. When she broke down sobbing, I'm never good enough. I'm never going to be good enough. It's like she can't get there. And part of that is because she experiences that the guideposts in a way keep moving. And the best example of that is the weight. When, many would argue she didn't have a weight problem. Clearly she wasn't obese. And yet at the same time, her mom was saying, well, she ought to be 110 pounds. And then according to Nicole, 105, then it went to 100. So that's what I mean by the goalposts moving. And that would have been very upsetting. And then this is also substantiated by her friends, or not her friends, but the women at FSU, one of whom clearly was her friend. But they all three girls said that she didn't feel like she could measure up, that her mom didn't approve of the way she was. She wasn't kind of a frilly type of girl. And they noted that Nicole felt very uncomfortable about her body. And that was a result of her mom's wanting her to be other than she was.
You may have mentioned it earlier this morning, but just to clarify, your clinical interview with Joey, where you asked him questions about
Yes.
Nicole's childhood, just the date for that so the jury has that.
Yeah, my recollection, it's definitely in September. I'll give you the exact.
And that's fine, September, but if you don't,
2015.
Okay.
And I think I saw Joseph, but I saw him before he saw Nicole in jail. That's my recollection. So,
September
it's-
15 is fine.
yeah, okay.
Now, any other instances of psychological abuse that you can recall with regard to either the records, interviews, or Nicole reporting that we haven't covered?
Well, we did mention the weight issue. We mentioned the liposuction that she had twice, that she didn't question, that she did because her mom, as she said, her mom's the nurse.
Yeah,
and
twice.
That was what was needed. She had her teeth whitened, and that was another thing that her mom
See, I missed that
imposed
first
on
two
her.
times.
And then, which is clearly an example of psychological abuse, Nicole, her mom wanted her to have LASIK surgery. Nicole was very concerned or frightened of that. And a lot of people don't like people or doctors operating on the rise. And according to witness accounts plus, and I mean the girls at FSU, and then also to Nicole, she really didn't want it. She was terrified. Her brother said that she was terrified of that. but her mom took her to the doctor, and according to Nicole, when Nicole said she told the nurse or the medical person there she didn't want it, and the nurse said something to the mother indicated her displeasure. So Nicole went along with that, she was willing to do that. And then when they afterwards left the doctor's office, and now Nicole said, I really don't want this LASIK procedure. The mother cursed at her. Again, it was pretty strong, according to what was reported to me, that she was effing ungrateful bitch. I mean, that's what was reported. So Nicole felt like, again, she caved that she had to do this. Now, this is a significant event. I want to just point out that this LASIK procedure happened on August 17th, 2015, which is very close in time to when the first incident happened. And
So we're talking about days from when Bob was killed and Mom.
Yes.
And have you had an opportunity to review the LASIK records? And in fact, is there a notation on there by one of the medical personnel that it indicates the patient was extremely nervous?
Yes, there's that. And there's also the notation of the date. It was the 17th of August, 15, and the procedure was scheduled for the following week, which would have been the 24th of August. That's on the same records I reviewed.
Any other instances of psychological abuse that you documented before we get into the 12 characteristics?
Is it appropriate to give an example with respect to Joe's experience, or just with
No,
respect,
just anything.
Nicole's? Okay, all right. I don't think I somewhat referenced this. One of the roommates mentioned that Nicole, again, was in sort of a frilly type of girl, and her mom wanted her to get her hair done. She did that. She wanted to have her mom wanted to have the nails done. Now, the significance is that she just could never measure up, that her mother wanted her to be something she wasn't. And this is what the other girls, the three FSU women, picked up in interactions with her. She didn't feel good. In fact, she felt defeated by her mom with respect to who she was.
Are these instances of psychological abuse appear to be somewhat consistent throughout Nicole's childhood? Do they appear to be more prevalent in certain areas of her childhood? Or is it fair to say consistent throughout?
When I look at the instances that I've mentioned, I would
So
have
what
to say
I'm
throughout,
hearing
because
is
when you're looking at a parent that hits a child and curses at a child because she can't do the voicemail correctly, or because she gets a question wrong, we're going back a long time. So those incidents go throughout her childhood, and then they go through college.
All right, Dr. Heidi, when you wrote one of the books that you testified to earlier with regard to children who kill their parents, was there a section in the book that dealt with 12 common characteristics among children who kill their parents? And what was that based on, if you can explain briefly?
Yes, there's a chart that I get, or a table of 12 characteristics commonly found among severely abused children who kill their parents. I want to make a difference there. So severely abused children who kill their parents. And where that table came from is I reviewed the literature back in late 80s, 90s, and those were in other people's reports and in my clinical evaluations. And then since then, in Understanding Parasite, which was published in 2013, there are many more clinical reports, and those remain consistent. So
these are based on research that you yourself had done in literature that you've reviewed over your career. Can you talk
Yes.
about the 12 characteristics commonly found in abused kids who kill their parents? And which, if any, apply to Nicole? Why don't we go through the ones that apply to Nicole?
Okay, well, Counselor, most of them do. I think 11 out of 12. But if we go to, I'm going to go to page 65.
62.
62 is it? All right, let me just see. And then shall I read them, or?
Just tell me which ones apply to Nicole.
All right, well, there are 12, and I would
like this attorney is
say there are
so
data to support these
fucking
11.
demanding.
There's a pattern of family
It's
violence, and that
annoying.
includes the abuse
Yeah.
and neglect, and that this isn't only what Nicole experienced. This is growing up in a household where she has seen, according to a doctor's report, Dr. Anderson's, untold episodes of physical and verbal altercations between her mother and father. This is as a child, as really very young, from time of birth to probably 3 or 4 years old.
The next
So,
one.
Okay. Second one, youth's attempts to obtain help from others fail. That applies in the sense others were aware of this and yet didn't do anything. And a good example of this, and the family was trying, but they were aware that she was afraid. And in fact, Eric Lear and David Lear both referenced that Nicole would say, please don't tell my mom. She borrowed money on occasion because she needed it for things, not foolishly, I mean, but the conversations would begin or end with, please don't tell my mom. So, and in fact, they did try, as I said earlier, I testified, they tried to help her. But the point is, others knew, and yet she didn't get that type of help. And in fact, that one incident where, I don't know if, I can only tell you, I read it in the deposition, Eric Lear said they were having, they were at the Wing House. They had been at the mall. They had had a time together. They were eating. And then she left. Nicole left to go off on her own for a little while. And the family got worried. Where was she? And they called the mom. And the mom came. They called the mom because they were concerned. Nicole came back from shopping or whatever. And they said, oh, we called your mom. Your mom's on the way. And she, according to Eric Lear, cried and just said, please, something like, don't let me go, or something along those lines. And he talked about seeing the fear in her eyes and that it was genuine. So, here's like an example where people are seeing this. She knows they're seeing it, and yet, for whatever reasons, they're not in a position where they feel they can act. So that's what I mean by she's gone to others for help. And
Number 3?
Yeah. 3, her efforts to escape the family situation fail. And you see this, she goes to the grandmothers, the maternal grandmothers, and she likes that. Apparently the maternal grandmother was affectionate. She said she had a good time there. But then, this is a good example of Florida Air Academy. She was doing well in the 7th grade. I think it was the 7th grade there. And the mother wanted her to go to Florida Air Academy. And Eric said, the depositions, or said, I didn't talk to him, so it had to be the deposition I read, that she was really doing well in that environment and they didn't want her to go, but the mother who was being deployed wanted her there. So what I'm talking about here, it was an escape. Grandma's was an escape. Anime, I don't know if that's been talked about. She was very heavily into anime. She drew it, she role played, she watched it. And her mother devalued that, said it was, I don't like to say these words, but it was shit, and may have said effing shit. So, that was an escape. Not necessarily a healthy one, but that's again another example of an escape. She also tells a very concrete one where they're having this, the mother is upset with her. I think she's in the 10th grade. I'd have to look at my notes exactly what it was. Was it the handwriting thing? And Nicole runs to the bathroom and locks the door, and the mother is banging on the door and tells her to come out. Again, there's cursing. It's the F word is what was reported. Nicole caves and comes out. So it's like she can't get away from this. Then she goes, to London. Now, this is certainly a good thing, but she's doing okay in London because she's away from that. And she's not afraid that her mom is going to suddenly appear. This is an issue with her, that her mom is going to suddenly appear and she's going to get angry. So these are all examples. Plus, which is really probably the most troubling of all, Nicole considered suicide and also made an attempt at suicide through pills. So these are all examples of her wanting to get away, to get out of that situation.
Number 4?
The youth is isolated from other people. And that's true. That's another one that applies. Now, some of this is because clearly of her history. Nicole was not accepted early on. This is from Joey Joseph's account. She's not accepted in school. She was bullied. She didn't fit in. This is reported at the Florida Air Academy. It's at FSU. Now, at FSU, it's kind of understandable. She's got mental health problems. Hygiene is poor. It's offensive to deal with her. So they reject her, understandably, except for these 2 girls, Laura and Angelica. So she's isolated. And what does she do? She goes into her computer. She creates a whole world in there because on your computer, and she said, it's in my report, it was her peace, her tranquility, her escape. Because on the computer, she could interact with people. She could be powerful, in my words, but she wasn't judged. She had a life there. So that's very isolated, but she's not like going to parties. Like again, as a college professor, what do normal kids do? They date, they hang out with their friends, they go out drinking with their friends. At a place like FSU, there probably a girl is in a sorority. She's not doing any of that stuff. She's by herself for the most part, except she does have a friendship with Laura. But she's isolated hours and hours a day. And even when she went to go see Joey at his home in the summer, Joey had to make ground rules. And the ground rules were, you've got to converse with us, come and talk to the wife, Joey, and the children. You got to come out of the room. You've got to shower. You've got to get off the computer because he said she had this weird connection. You have to put the computer down.
A lot of people
and you
are
must shower.
social.
So the isolation is
A lot
unquestionably
of times
noticed
people
by
are social on
people across the board.
computers.
Number 5?
Home life becomes
Not
increasingly
uncommon.
intolerable. And I think this applies, and this is where you can see the mental health deterioration. She sees it. And remember, it's her perceptions that are critical here. She sees what's going on in her life. Is she's a failure because of her mental health problems. She's got all of these results of things that are sort of natural consequences. She's failing. Why? Because she's not going to classes. That's one example.
That'll
She's
do it.
not paying attention because she's in a fog. So she loses her bicycle. She doesn't know where it is. She loses the key to the storage room. All these things because of her mental health deterioration.
Seems
So
pretty
she's thinking that her
forgetful just
mom
in
is going to be
general.
very upset by all this. And so this whole thing of her mom coming home and her expected wrath, and then this is Nicole's mind, I would think, rather than reality. But she thinks her stepfather is spying on her. She told the other doctor she's been consistent, that he watched her going to see how much she was eating in the refrigerator. She thinks they were snooping through her stuff. I have no idea. But she doesn't feel like many
I
people
wouldn't
do,
put
that
it
home is a
past
safe
them.
place.
Mom
She
seems
feels
pretty
like she's in
controlling.
a state of hypervigilance in terms of particularly her mom.
Number 6?
Youth feels trapped and helpless, and this clearly applied. She talks about, to me, and possibly the other doctors, I think she did mention it to at least one of them, this thing about being buried. Well, she may mean it as a metaphor, but it probably does, because she's literally not buried, but this whole sense that she's trapped, she's immobilized, there's no place she can go. And I even said that to her between the first and the second incident, which is, the obvious question, why did you stay? She said, I had no place to go. She feels trapped in that environment, in that home situation. She doesn't have friends. Now, the grandmother would have been, and Joey said this very clearly to me. Joey said, if only she had reached out and said to him, I think he meant Uncle Eric, or to the grandmother, they would have helped her. They would have done something. But she didn't realize that. She felt like she's there and there's nobody else. She's trapped in that home situation.
Number 7.
Youth loses control due to inability to cope. And that's, we've talked around the issue of deteriorating mental health and psychosis. From everything that I have seen, what has happened is when she kills the dad and the mother, she's in a state of panic. She's not able, she's at a point she loses control. She said, I think, she hadn't happened. So it's like this idea, there's not like her thinking, here are my choices, I'm gonna do this. It's sort of like just, again, a loss of control. And I may be getting ahead here, but with respect to the shooting of her stepfather, she talks about, the gun, holding the gun, basically thinking she's gonna kill herself. And then what she does, she says she hears a conversation and her words, panic, and it happens. She shoots him. It's like this whole idea, again, of a loss of control.
Number 8.
Youth has little or no criminal history. Very typical. In the case of the severely abused parasite offender, they have either minimal or no criminal history, and she has none that I'm aware of.
A gun is available. Number 9.
Yes, and that's sadly the case in most parasites involving young people. A gun is readily available in homes, so when they are in this state of panic or whatever their circumstances are, the gun is within reach. They're not stealing these guns. They're not going out and buying them. They're in the home where they can get access to them.
10 would be the one I believe you don't think applies, and that is the victim or parent is a heavy user of alcohol or drugs. We don't have that here.
No evidence of that. In fact, to the contrary.
So number 11.
Evidence to suggest the offender is in a dissociative state in some cases. This was clearly, and I think I've talked about dissociation, this was somebody who dissociated a lot, meaning her grasp on reality is not good. And what she talks about is when she's in the mirror, and this has some significance for her, these mirror incidents, which I can talk about, but at any rate, when she's struggling with this, what she's going to do, she has gaps in memory, not tremendous gaps. She knows that she shot her stepfather and mother, but this is very consistent with dissociation.
See, but that's not necessarily, because you also said that she doesn't
and just
remember.
reacting, basically, and that's what she did.
And the last common characteristic that you believe applies to Nicole.
Yes. And
She has good memory. She has bad memory. You said she doesn't remember significant events in her life, or has no memories of her brother. But then yet
I would not say that with
really
family members.
remembers-
Did you in fact see evidence of that relief in her jail visit with
Trauma
Joey
life.
when she's describing how much better she feels?
Yes, she laughed. She was like a child, giddy. She said, I can now weigh myself without having to worry about that certain
Yeah,
someone.
because she's relieved.
And she's clearly relieved and she's remained so, because she's no longer in fear of her mother. And it's not her mother's disapproval. This delusion has remained consistent throughout, that she thought her mother, once she became aware of all these failures of Nicole, and I've made reference to some of the failing grades, she photoshopped her grades. When her mom found out that and she lost her bike, she lost the keys to the storage room, she had an unpaid storage bill, and the big one, that she didn't have a dorm room. And that was because of her. She's in the clouds. She's on the computer. She's not doing what she should be doing as a college student. She thinks, well, when mom finds out about this, mom is going to be angry. Most parents would be, but she thinks that mom is going to be so explosive that mom's going to kill her. And she cites, and I want to just mention 2 things because they come to mind. She cites this, and she cites it repeatedly, and she believes it. She would use as evidence that her mom would kill her, that her mom had made comments, perhaps several times, that she was going to kill Bob with cake. Now, we all know that's ridiculous. Maybe the mom said that, I'll kill Bob with cake, but it's a ridiculous statement. But this was evidence to her that her mom was potentially kill somebody. So that's like, again, a very good example of how she perceived. And then she mentioned to me, and
Let
I
me stop
remember,
you real quick on that.
Yeah.
The evidence or what she believed was evidence that her mom was going to kill her because her mom had indicated that I was going to give Bob junk food or make him die. Did you also see, and again, you're evaluating her early on in 2015, that same belief 4 years later when Dr. Lazaro evaluates her?
yes, the thing about her mom killing and then that she was going to kill Bob with cake, consistent, and she believes that. And then I was going to add something she said in the very first evaluation, and it was an odd thing. So I just and then she said it again, and she's referenced it several times. She looks at me and she says, you can never know a person. And then she talked about a mother who put her child in the oven. And this she must have read about or it was on the news, not her mom. And this was sort of like data that supported that people can do things that you would never expect. So those delusions, and I can go through 13 interviews, or the 12, the last one was, this didn't come up, it was very brief. I can go through data in 12 interviews where unsolicited, except for the one where I go through the whole homage, she brings up this delusion that her mom would have killed her. She believes it fervently, and she's mentioned multiple times, would anybody doubt this? Because her mom would kill Bob with cake. Her mom had it sort of, she didn't use these words, but she could do stuff like this. It was in her makeup.
And that's delusional thinking
Absolutely.
into the evaluation with Dr. Lazera.
Yes, did I see that? Absolutely.
Now, you
And in
mentioned
fact, go ahead.
you
No, it's
mentioned
fine.
failing
Now,
grades
even
earlier, and I
because
just want to
she
show you what's already
thought
been
that she
introduced as Exhibit
could
8.
doesn't
A
necessarily
copy of Nicole's
mean.
transcript. If you'll look at that screen, just for the jury's benefit,
I
Yes.
I
And
just
kind of-
think that's a
we don't need to walk
cop-out.
through the whole transcript, but at what point does it appear her grades are beginning to decline as it relates to this transcript?
Okay, well, I'll do this quickly. I analyzed these grades. You've got 5 semesters if you count summer. You see where she went from basically a 3.0 average. Now, let me see where you would see that. But she's done very well in the beginning.
This is page 1. If you need to see
Okay.
page 2, there's page 2. Does that have the GPAs?
Yeah, but what you see, and I did sort of the analysis in my report, she goes from, and I'm just going to reference, that she goes from like a B, a 3.1 or 2 in the beginning, which is very good. That's in the first semester, and that's when she's in London. And then it consistently goes down to the last semester where her average is about a D. It's 1 point something. And again, I can look at my report, and you see it going down consistently. So what that tells me when I look at that, something's going on. I mean, obviously, this is a individual who got into the college, so she had the ability to get in. She got a 3.1 or 2 her first semester when she's in London. She comes back to she comes to Tallahassee, and it keeps going down. Now, if this was, and some kids do this, they get on their own and they start partying and they're drinking, some start smoking marijuana, they start hanging out with their boyfriends, they're going out and they fail out because they're irresponsible. This isn't what's going on with Nicole. She's not drinking, she's not smoking, she doesn't have a boyfriend, she's not hanging out with her friends. So something's going on here. And then what I think is the retreat into fantasy. She's spending, according to those who know her, the 3 Florida State University girls, she's spending her time on the computer, and she's being Elsa from the Frozen character. She's into anime. And so that's, I would say, the explanation for the failing grades or the decreasing grades.
It happens. It happens more often than you would
Can you
think.
explain, well, first of all, just if you can briefly tell the jury what psychological testing is and how that's used in your field?
Yeah, I did a few tests.
those
the
people
reason
don't
I like to do-
necessarily
and
feel-
it's good practice when it's necessary. If you do tests, it's another source of data. And again, you want to corroborate. So if what the client is telling you, the defendant is telling you, is consistent with the test data, it gives you like a more solid foundation to draw conclusions. So I do, usually I do, and particularly in a case like this, but almost in every case, a trauma symptom inventory. It's called the TSI-2. It's very well respected in the field. And so I did that test, and I did it twice. And I can talk about all the scales, but I'll just say right now, it has, and then I'll answer anything else, but I just want to say it has 2 validity scales. So what that means is the test, and many tests have this, and it's good. They have items in there to see if the person is responding honestly. And they have in the TSI-2 and in some other tests, they have like if you're faking good because you want to look really good, or if you're faking bad, like you want to look really ill. And it'll pick that up and it'll tell you don't count this test because the person is basically faking one way or the other. So I gave that to Nicole twice. I gave it to her right at the time she was right at the time she was arrested. And then I gave it to her 3 years later. So I would have had 2 validity scores on that in 2000 and 2 in 2018, 3 years later, and they were all valid. So that tells me the test data.
What does the test measure though? What are you trying to
Measures
accomplish?
trauma symptoms, which would be expected if somebody really has endured a lot of trauma, that they would rate their symptoms would reflect on this scale. So it shows trauma-related symptoms, and it also shows things that are related like depression, suicidality, anger, and so forth. So that's what that test shows.
And what did Nicole's scores on that test you administered both at the time of her arrest and 3 years later reveal as far as her scores in the various scales or areas?
Okay. There was a change, and this is important. In 2015, so again, this is within days of the shootings, she showed that what the test data did, and I can go into lots more detail, but I'll
I
just give
want you
you,
to go through the scales and what she scored.
you want me to go into specific scales?
The 4 scales, and again, just for your reference, I'm on page 31.
Okay.
Just the
all right,
scales
okay.
and the scores.
I thought you just wanted the solutions. That's fine. All right. So 31, okay.
She's rescuing her and she doesn't like
Now,
it. She's getting
this is a little complex, so I'll try to make this clear. She scored high
flustered.
on 2 factors there, and one of them is post-traumatic stress symptoms. And there, under this factor, there are 4 scales. And when I say high, meaning there are cutoffs that you use. I go into more detail, but we'll just, for now, just say those cutoffs. Is that good, or do you want the numbers?
Just what she scored on that
Okay.
on that test when you administered
Yeah,
it.
so what she scored then was high on the post-traumatic stress factor. That consists of dissociation.
You
So
can
what that
tell
means
the
is,
score,
you
but
know,
you need
being in sort of her
explanation.
own zoning out, spacing, not being, really part of what's going on. Intrusive experiences, what that means, again, part of the same post-traumatic stress, factor is that she's got experiences coming in that are traumatic. So when I told you about like her sobbing when she goes to the 3rd grade and then she brings up the 10th grade and the 11th grade and just breaking down, that's what we mean by intrusive experiences. They come in, they're still traumatic to her. The defensive avoidance, what that means is trying not to think about any of the things that bother her. One way of the defensive avoidance clearly is just going into the computer. She's not dealing with it at all. And then the anxious arousal, she will present as high anxiety. You see this in the police interview, particularly when she's with the nice policeman, she looks pretty calm. He's very pleasant. He engages with her. As soon as he's gone, she's very anxious. Now, when she was evaluated by Dr. Lazaro picked up the anxiety because I would think that Nicole understood that she was being evaluated, and this is serious at this point, but earlier on, she didn't have that same anxiety in the context of evaluations. But you see that she's got this anxious arousal and she's hypervigilant with respect
To what?
concerns
With respect
about
to what?
her mother becoming explosive and hurting her. So that is the post-traumatic stress factor. Then another one that she was very high on is what's called the self-disturbance factor, and that is depression. She's very high on depression. Insecure attachment, meaning she doesn't have good attachments to others. She's very sensitive. She's hypersensitive to criticism because she's been criticized, and she avoids relationships. So that's under insecure attachment. And impaired self-reference, what that means, she doesn't have a sense of self. She took that on, like, as I gave that example, when her mother says goes, she hasn't grown up individuated. I saw that in jail when she started to talk like the inmates. She never cursed before, and all of a sudden the language changed. So she doesn't have a sense of who she is. Well, she's 21, she should have a sense of who she is.
You indicated
So
3
those
years.
are the areas in terms of the scales.
Let me ask my question real quick. You
Yeah.
indicated 3 years later, you re-administered the test, and there appeared to be a difference in the scores, and what do you attribute that to be?
Well, let me just say very briefly, some of the PTSD symptoms subsided, the dissociation, spacing out, not being there, just sort of avoiding the real world. That's still high. She still has that poor sense of self. So while you see clearly there's change. The change that you see is she's less, the post-traumatic stress symptoms have decreased. And to answer your question, why did they decrease? This may sound odd. However, she feels safer in jail than she did at home. And why? Because jail's predictable. Our jails in Hillsborough County, you may not know this, but they're open bay. What that means is that the deputy's right in the room with everybody. You can see, like, it's almost like this courtroom. You can look around, you can see the inmates. And there's been research on this. These are actually safer than putting people in cells with bars or putting 2 people in a cell. So as odd as this may sound, it's a safe environment for many. For Nicole, she felt a lot safer in jail than at home. And what's important, remember, she thinks like a child. If you follow the rules, and the rules are pretty clear in jail, you're okay. Jail is predictable. So she was, unless we start talking about her mom and those incidents, meaning the things that really were traumatic, she's okay being, when I say okay being, she's not as frightened, hyper aroused. She's not afraid that she's not afraid she's going to get killed in jail. She feels it's a safe environment and predictable.
Can you define for the jury what battered child syndrome is?
Yes, it refers to like the long-term effects of prolonged and repetitive abuse, and that abuse can be physical, certainly sexual, emotional abuse. It's typically seen in the context of physical abuse, but it also encompasses the psychological abuse or emotional abuse. And it's similar to battered women syndrome. There are some differences. And what happens is a collection basically of symptoms, you call it behavioral psychological symptoms, that are associated with learned helplessness, where people, and you see this with Nicole, they just sort of give up. They just think there's nothing they can do to better their situation. And it also includes symptoms of PTSD, which the test data show.
What is your opinion as to whether Nicole meets the criteria for battered child syndrome?
Absolutely.
And tell me, again, obviously you've talked about the abuse, but if you could just summarize what the basis of that opinion is.
Yes. Why I would classify her as a battered child is because of the extreme psychological abuse. There was physical abuse. As I said, it was not as extreme as I have seen in other cases, but the psychological abuse for Nicole was severe. And you have to remember, this starts when she's a baby in the sense of the conflict she's raised in. And what's really struck me is, there are reports that say as a kid, these are doctors' reports, that she was a normal kid. She was happy. I watched videos of her smiling. I've seen pictures. Her brother said she liked to sing. She was active. And then the brother said, Joey, the spark went out, and other people talk about it. So why would this be? Again, it's the environment, the stress that this child has been raised in, and the psychological abuse where she's been attacked, undermined, to the point she can't even think. She can't tell me about what she thinks. She's got to revert back to what mom says at 21 to 25 years old.
What is your opinion as to how battered child syndrome ties in to the homicide of her mother?
Sleeping.
Well, I think this is, let me pull this together because I think it's very helpful. So you got this, remember, she's, her way of dealing with things is very simple. Like a child, then you have to think in terms of this battering, the psychological battering, where she doesn't have any confidence, she doesn't think that she can handle things, and then she's literally terrified of her mother. Now, again, you've got to go to her perceptions, and I say when I say God, I mean that's in terms of thinking. This is what she thought that her mother, because of the stuff that was currently going on, was going to lash out in her in anger. And there's the college girls talk about how she was afraid of her mother. I've already talked about Uncle Eric talking about, at least in the depots, about being afraid of her mother, to the point of like terror. He even mentioned in the depot that if she was in the house at the grandmother's and the mother called, she would just leave immediately and not even say goodbye. So there's this terror, and family members noted, the girls noticed it at FSU. So I think that some of the data, and I can go into specifics, but clearly she's terrified of her mom. Now, again, we have to look at her. And I keep coming back. Those are her perceptions based on her life experiences.
That's what I want to ask you. Based on the history of abuse that you've already testified to, did Nicole, in her mind, believe at the time that she pulled the trigger that her mom was going to
Yeah,
kill her?
my
Was that
son is
true
on his
belief in her
way
mind?
here.
In her mind,
If I
absolutely.
have to stop this video again, I quit.
And again, that's a result of the declining mental health that we've talked about, her being in a psychotic state at that point.
In your opinion, what were the 3 possible outcomes Nicole had at that moment?
Well, what Nicole talked about to me and to the others, she saw 3 possible outcomes. She could kill herself, which she had the gun and was thinking of. She could be killed, or she could kill her mother. That's what she saw as the 3 possible outcomes.
We talked about the deterioration over time, the failing grades, the hygiene, everything in college. But how do you believe what was going on in Nicole's life, the dorm and things, at that moment, the LASIK, the week leading up to the killings led to that deterioration, which ultimately led to her believing her mom was going to kill her?
They're all coming to a head, and this is the accumulation of stressors, which is very important, and I've mentioned these, but they're now coming to a head. She had a nice time at Joey's. She gets back, but remember, I've already said the law of natural consequences. She's not paying attention, so bike stolen. Then you've got she's getting a storage fee. She's locked out. She lost the storage key. She's got the failing grades. She photoshopped them because she was terrified to show her mother. And then she's got the LASIK surgery coming up. And then I think what is just critical for her, just sends her over the edge, is that she didn't have the dorm room. And she knows that or expects, let's put it this way, that when her mother finds out that she does not have the dorm room, her mother is going to go up to school and she's going to find out everything else. And the everything else is just what I told you. And her mother's going to lash out and kill her. Those, again, are her perceptions. So what's critical is this dorm room. It sort of brings it all up to her head. Now, Joey did mention, and when I talked with him in September 2015, he said, yeah, his mother would have been angry with those things. It's probably a normal parental reaction. However, Nicole didn't just think her mother was going to be angry. She thought her mother would be angry to the point of killing her, and then she would be disappeared. I think she even used that word in that concept, that nobody would know and nobody would give it. I think she said, damn about her. And she didn't perceive Bob, the stepfather, Mr. Deans, as going to help her. And if her mother killed her, that, as bizarre as this may sound, that Bob would take the mother's side. Again, it's a child. Bob would take the mother's side. And so that was the situation. This is all in her mind, obviously.
Before we get to the ultimate diagnosis that you gave Nicole, was that thought or fear that her mother was going to kill her, in your opinion, a delusional belief in and of itself?
Absolutely. I don't think for a moment that her mother would have killed her. Certainly no evidence that in any way that is accurate.
However, in Nicole's mind, that was her delusional belief at the time she killed her mother.
It was back in 2015, and the last time I spoke to her was in January. She still believed it, and watching Dr. Lazzaro's clinical interview, she covered that very thoroughly in the last segment she did 3 days, and Nicole is steadfast. There's quite an exchange about that, and the doctor challenges her, and Nicole, she starts rocking and crying and sobbing, saying that what did I have to get killed? She believed even then, and this is almost 4 years out, that her mother would have killed her.
All right, I want to go, first of all, explain to the jury what the DSM-5 is.
By now.
Yes.
I want to go to the diagnosis.
Yeah, the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and the 5 means it's in the 5th edition. It's a book that's relied on. It was published by the American Psychiatric Association.
Would then
It's relied on by mental health
be
professionals
told,
to diagnose.
and she would be able to
All right, I
recognize
want to
that.
go, and I'm just going to
was
use this
a
as an illustrative
delusion.
aid, the actual book,
Okay.
to the section on schizophrenia. Can you see that on your screen, or do you want?
No, ma'am, I can see it.
All right, can you first tell the jury what is your diagnosis of Nicole?
I believe, based on my clinical evaluations, reviewing 13 meetings with her, and then the other evidence that I've seen and reviewing the other clinical evaluations done by the doctors and the data there that she fits schizophrenia.
And again, we've just talked about delusions, but if you can explain paragraph A for us as far as the duration and when you believe the delusional thinking began.
Well, it says, and we go by this when we're diagnosing, so you need 2 or more of the following, and they give a list of 5, and it says each present for a significant portion of time during at least a 1-month period, and we didn't have treatment here, and at least one of these must be 1, 2, or 3. So we're looking for at least one of these ongoing for a month. So we have delusions which have been ongoing now for close to 4 years. And it may have been, let's say there's evidence, it may have been before, obviously, the homicides, but clearly we're going on from the first time I met her, which was August 15th to the current time. So we've got delusions. The delusions are that her mother was going to kill her. And then the other one is what I call these delusions of reference. And there are multiple ones. I was just looking even on the last interview, and it's not like I probe for these. I mean, she just talks about it because she rambles on. But the last interview in January 2019, she talks about signs she's getting from God still at that point. And she told me about, as luck would have it, when she gets to FSU, she has 2 dorm rooms. So she didn't know about, up until after Bob died or was killed, she didn't know about she didn't know about either dorm room. She gets up, she has 2. Now she interprets this as a sign from God that she went to one dorm room and the police went to the other room. And so this was a sign that God was protecting her.
What
Then she
evidence
tells-
did you see in Nicole with regard to hallucinations, the second
Okay.
portion of A?
Hallucinations, yes, I saw that in terms of the screaming. She mentioned that to me. She mentioned it in the beginning, has been consistent in saying there was screaming. What I thought was particularly significant.
And you're referring to the screaming in her head?
In her head, it's in her head, yeah. Which subsided after she killed her mother. She said it had been ongoing for a year. What I found significant, when I went through the jail notes, and when she was first admitted to the jail, there is the admitting nurse, I believe it was, her name was Scherner, I think, or Schnern, I could get it, but she tells her on August 24th, 2015, that she heard the screaming voice. And so that's significant, she's reporting it. And she also reported, just for completeness, that she had been thinking about killing herself, and she gives a certain date, which is right in that time frame.
With regard to the hallucinations and when the screaming in her head, from the records that you reviewed, did it appear that began sometime after her return from London, as she reported it to her brother?
Yes, that's what and I think she told that to me too. It's certainly consistent with my memory. This starts, because London was a good experience for her. She liked London, a good experience there. It's when she gets to Florida State University, everything starts to work. She's not able to meet the demands of college life, and the screaming starts. Her grades start going down.
And a time frame for London, we think, is about 2013. Is that your recollection?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it'd be the fall semester of 2013.
Any evidence of disorganized speech with Nicole?
Yes, and I talked a lot about this, and it's still ongoing. That's what I meant by she can't answer a question. It's this going off on excessive extraneous detail, because that's how her mind is. And she can't answer a question directly. Sometimes she comes back to the question and answers it, and sometimes she never comes back to it. And it's interesting, in Dr. Lazaro's evaluation, Dr. Lazaro said at least twice, and I can get you the references, where she made the doctor commented on the tangents, and at one point laughingly said, "Nicole, you're driving me crazy the way you go off on tangents." So that means that was obvious to Dr. Lazaro, the disorganized speech, which is representative of disorganized thinking, as of, I believe that was, well, it was either April or May of 2019.
Grossly disorganized.
Yes, and this, you can look for lots of data for this, but I've already mentioned the police interview. I would certainly characterize her behavior then, the telling stories, the laughing inappropriately, giving riddles, as certainly evidence of disorganized behavior. Then if you think of the actual homicides incidents, what happened there does not suggest somebody who has good reality contact. She shoots her stepfather, then from what I have seen, basically stays in the house. She does go and see her Uncle David to get $100 to pay the dorm bill, but she stays there, doesn't know what to do, wrestling with things, and then shoots her mom. So again, it's just suggesting that the behavior is not syncing up with a good thought process.
And talk to us about what negative symptoms are and which ones apply to Nicole. I can turn the page.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Negative symptoms, what I would put here as very important, the lack of hygiene. This is a critical thing. And again, this is so far over the norms. I mean, that her roommates even put their mattress outside the suite because it smelled so bad. The roommates obviously, had problems and rejected her. Uncle Eric said in his deposition 3 times he went back to it, how much that room, he said the room stank and the mattress, but he also made reference to Nicole's hygiene and being able to smell it several feet away. So that's a very big symptom. It's a classic symptom. Then you see where she's not doing what she should be doing in terms of going the normal things of college. She's isolating. She's not being social. So I would certainly put that as a negative symptom as well. They call it asociality. The disturbed sleep pattern, it's certainly, I don't know that I put that. I'm just looking because you highlighted the DSM, I guess. But the point is, what I want to highlight, the negative symptoms that to me strike out are particularly the hygiene and the lack of doing the normal things one would do, being involved with others, which would be a withdrawal from others.
Dr. Heidi, you in fact made a graphic, and within the DSM-5, within the section where you find schizophrenia, they're characterized as schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. That kind of like a chapter.
Schizophrenia.
You made a graphic kind of to just illustrate what
Schizophrenia
that chapter
treated.
kind of includes, and would that
In
assist
my
you in explaining the
experience, that
spectrum to the
is,
jury?
When
Can I
they're
put that on the screen?
treated,
Well, yes, I mean,
can realize
sure, that's fine. I
that
can
their
take this.
episodes
I just wanted to,
are episodes,
and I don't know if they can see this well,
and that it
but I
is a
can
delusion.
highlight it. You know, you're looking at a continuum, and as I said when I
She's
started off,
saying
you know,
that
she's
it
in a
is a
psychotic state
delusion.
when this happens. And so if her functioning before then was good, and if she recovered, we put her in the first category, brief psychotic disorder. And that lasts a day to a month. But here, you don't see, we're 4 years out almost, and there's not recovery. And so all I wanted to illustrate, I was explaining this to defense counsel, is if you're looking about it, schizophrenia diagnosis in relation to time, you know, you often have a psychotic episode. But in this case, you not only have that active psychotic episode when she kills her parents, but it doesn't go away. So we're at this point where if it only lasted 6 months and she got better, or she was in that period 1 to 6 months, let's say that, we would call it schizophreniform disorder. But the fact that it's ongoing, and it has been, we're almost 4 years out, and those symptoms, particularly delusions are still there. Hallucinations don't seem to be, but the delusions are there very strongly. The tangential speech or the disorganized thought, that's there. And then what's also important, still having problems with hygiene. Even the state doctor noticed that in her evaluation or April or May 2019, Nicole knows the doctor's going to come see her, and she comes somewhat unkempt, didn't shower, didn't brush her teeth. And the doctor even says, well, you know, you knew I was coming. And Nicole says, well, you know, I just didn't get up. And, you know, so you're seeing the problems again in functioning, and we're 4 years out.
And we're talking about 4 years out from the time of the offense, but
It
you'd agree that these
almost
symptoms were beginning
seems
well
more
into
like
2013
a
before that.
Yes, and thank
developmental.
you, Counselor. That's a very important point, because when you see what the roommates put established, and this is why you want corroborative data. What the roommates help us to see, and the family, is that this
Instead of
way predated the
schizophrenic.
shootings. In other words, the family's
Spectrum,
noticing,
which
and with
I've never really heard
concern
of
that
before.
there's a problem with Nicole, and they know something's
Be
mentally
more like a
wrong with her. They're suspecting it. And in fact, Joey related a conversation to me when I met with him, right, you know, again, within 2 weeks of the shootings, where Joey said to me, he said to his wife that he recognized that, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna suspend.
Let's not go into what you
Okay,
may.
all right, okay, all
Let me
right.
ask you this, Dr. Heidi, were you able to records, interviews, everything you've done in the last 4 years, able to point to any possible genetic contribution for purposes of Nicole's diagnosis of schizophrenia?
Yes, possibly, and I'll mention this again with some caution. I met with Mr. Nachtman for 4 hours, I think it was September 25th, so within about a month of the homicide. As I've already testified, I certainly loved his daughter, I think he still loves his daughter. But what I was struck by is we spent 4.25 hours together, and I have the notes, and I can show you this, this is what I wrote 4 years ago. He couldn't answer simple questions. He would go on off into tangents, sometimes I couldn't understand them. Or he'd tell me these long stories and then come back to the point. Then what I also noticed is he would laugh inappropriately, be talking about something painful and start laughing, which I would consider kind of bizarre behavior, because some of this stuff was painful. And then one of the characteristics associated with people with schizophrenia spectrum disorders is a lack of insight. And I read his deposition, and I believe it's right in the deposition where he said that, now remember, this is a man that has been fighting with his wife for years. Even after all the visitation was suspended, there's still conflict going on. They want to pay the child support. It's in the Florida Air Academy records trying to see the child. So there's real acrimony between the mother and the father. He says in the depo, well, there was no conflict between me, meaning him, and his Nicole's mother, Miriam, Mrs. Deans. So I'm thinking, that's bizarre, you know, that lack of insight. So, you know, if you look
Stop
at
you there for a
yeah,
second,
okay.
Dr. Heidi.
Yeah.
Did you also, in regards to Mr. Nachtman and your 4.5, I think you said 4 hour interview with him,
Yeah.
did you also have an opportunity to review jail visitations that Mr. Nachtman was having with Nicole, where he exhibited some of those same behaviors without going into specifics?
Yes, yes, the same difficulty sometimes. It was a little hard to understand, meaning because he the way he was putting his thoughts together. But again, he clearly loved his daughter, no question. In
Dr.
my-
Heidi, I may have missed this and it would have been my fault, but I wanted to talk about what in the records, we talked about this, the development of Nicole as a child, the personality development. What did you ascertain from the records as far as how many schools Nicole attended in her childhood?
Well, from what I could determine, she was at 9 schools. Mr. Nachtman reported 14. But
And
it's
how would he
just
know?
number 9.
'Cause he wasn't
That's
there.
a lot of schools to be in as a child.
And I was in 6.
Judge, if we can approach.
Yes.
Dr. Heidi, I want to ask you now, and I'm going to put up in front of you the jury instruction on insanity. And I want to ask your opinion as to whether you believe Nicole was insane at the time of the offenses.
Okay, so to answer your question, I'm going to go through it. Person is considered to be insane when she has a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. I think that applies in this case. I think she has severe mental illness. That's always been my position. And I think at this time, clearly it meets the diagnostic criteria for a case of mental. Then number 2, because of this condition, my understanding is that one of these met is she did not know what she was doing or its consequences. And I'm going to stop there for a moment. In my opinion, she did not understand or know the consequences of what she was doing. And that I
Yeah, I
can
believe
further explain if you like, but that's where I think she clearly meets the insanity, is that she did not know its consequences of her actions.
And to
But
be
she
clear, I
knew
understand
the
you're not a lawyer, but
consequences
before
that
between A
her
and B indicates that
actions
either
for
A
not
or B
getting
has to
all
be
this
met,
stuff
is your understanding
done
after reviewing this instruction.
Well, that's always been my.
was going to
position.
piss her off enough
Now, with
that she
regard
was going
to,
to kill her.
well, first of all, let me ask you
So
this. Did you previously
therefore,
testify in a battered child
she
syndrome
knew
hearing before, Your Honor, and the parties were there asking you questions about these topics?
Yes, if you,
She
you're talking
knew
about January
cause and
2019?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
mean, yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Um,
And were you asked a question as it relates to your opinion on specifically the McNaughton standard?
Yes, under McNaughton I was, and I did respond.
And if you could tell the jury, first of all, what McNaughton was and what your response was at the time you were asked that question about the McNaughton standard in
told
Florida.
Joey,
Yes.
I didn't think I could do
McNaughton
it,
is
but I did
similar.
it.
In fact, I teach that. McNaughton is essentially a person is considered to be insane if that individual has essentially a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. And here's where it's a little different. Because of this condition, she or he did not know, I'm gonna say he because that's the only how it is, because of this condition, he did not know what he was doing. Or you go to B, although he knew what he was doing, he did not know it was wrong. And so the difference in the jury instruction, when I looked at it, is in part A, that was very significant to me, where it said he, or in this case, she did not know what she was doing or its consequences.
Now, with regard to the wrongfulness part, or prong B that's in front of you, what has always been your opinion as to whether Nicole Nachtman knew that killing somebody was wrong under the law?
Under the law, yes. She did. She understood that.
And when you responded to that question at the previous hearing, was that what you were referring to?
Yes, and that's specifically what I was asked. I was asked under McNaughton, because I've looked at my testimony. It's on, I think, page 257. And Mr. Terry asked me, did she know what she was doing or it was wrong? It's right on the record.
My question to you now, though, is has your opinion always been that Nicole did not appreciate or know the consequences of what she had done?
Yes, and it has been. There was a meeting, and again, I can.
I don't want you to refer to that. Just answer. It's
Okay.
always been.
Always, and it's in my report, and that report was dated, I think, October 17, 2018, and I can reference the pages where I said, and I'd like to take a moment here, if I may, just to say that it's always been my opinion she didn't understand the consequences of what she had done. And in fact, for over 2 years, she thought her mother was still alive, or her mother could still, let's put it this way, affect the outcome of what was going on.
Now, with regard to the consequences question, you testified already. The jail visitation with her brother, not understanding really what she had done, the inappropriate affect in the police interview, and have those always been your opinions as it relates to whether she really grasped the situation that she was in at the time?
That, Mrs. Hersey, has always been my opinion, and it's documented in my report, 1018, and I can reference the page numbers. In fact, at one point, towards the end of the report, I say that she doesn't understand the consequences.
And so we're clear, your opinion, as it
No, I
relates
get
to
that.
the law,
Maybe
the
she
jury
doesn't understand
ultimately
the
be instructed on
consequences
should the judge
fully,
give this instruction,
what she could
is
be
that
get
Nicole meets
charged
prong 1
with or
and prong
whatever.
2A because of the consequences.
That is correct.
If I can have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
I did want to elaborate a little bit on that. When you initially interviewed Nicole, or at any point during the 4 years, what did Nicole tell you could happen to her as a result of this case, or what she would accept as a possible resolution? She gave you some options.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
tell you would be possible options that she would be willing to accept in relation to the resolution
they want
of
it.
what had occurred.
Now, this would have been very early in the interview. It might have been, was August 28, 2015. So this is 8 days after the incidents. And this is what I wrote on page 12. And the heading is Nicole's lack of appreciation and seriousness of the offenses. And I have Nicole understood the charges and the penalties did, but not really grasped the seriousness of the charges for a long time after her arrest. And then I said the reason is due to her low personality development and overall mental health, including her poor reality contact.
Dr. Heidi, just tell me what the
Okay.
four options she gave
Okay,
her.
all right, here they are. 4 different punishments. 1, she is willing to be tortured for a certain number of hours to be determined. 2, to be banished from the state of Florida. 3, to give her earnings for a certain number of years to be determined to the charity of the juror's choice. Or 4, to keep a journal of her behavior while living out of state for a certain number of years to be determined so the court can see that she is, quote, a good kid, unquote, and eventually release her from supervision so that she can do good for others. And then she also stated 2 or 3 times that she did not want any of her mother's money and her brother could have it all. So again, that goes in there are other references too. That's what she said 8 days after the homicide. She also said, I think it's very relevant, she said she would accept a short sentence or probation, but she did not want a conviction because she wanted to go into the military.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. I don't have any other questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, jury, we're going to take a afternoon break.
Well,
before we begin the
ma'am,
cross-examination. Please don't discuss
I
this amongst yourselves.
apologize.
If you're doing research related to the case, please avoid any reports in the case outside of the courtroom. All
That's
right.
not how that works. So clearly she does not understand. I don't think it's
During executive session,
schizophrenia,
you may
y'all.
Doctor, you may step down, you may enjoy the 15-minute break.
I really don't.
Testimony with anyone, unless all the attorneys are present. Ms.
I
Terry,
think
just
it is
approximate, we'll go ahead and
a
take a 15-minute break.
Casey asked you questions.
Yes, okay, thank you.
a developmental thing. It's not a
Yeah, well, are
not a
you
mental
physically
health.
concerned about this? Dr. Heidi, I'll have you
I
step
think it's
outside.
Question to make.
Okay, thank you. Any read? Ready?
Hi, y'all. Good Lord, I can't keep my shit together. What's happening? Oh, I don't have the sound.
Comment around here. I'm used to it. I don't hold it against anyone.
What do you say, sir? He's funny.
Yes, yes,
And just for the record, I want to point out I was an hour off and that's it.
A whole hour?
That's it. I was an hour off of my time.
That's common around here. I'm used to it. I don't hold it against anyone.
I told her that.
3 what?
Hours. I said 2.
And it was turned out to be 3?
I believe so.
That's why Ms. Holt is in charge.
I am gonna get Dr. Ewing out today though.
And I appreciated that optimism earlier.
If we have to sleep here,
Well, Mr. Terry has a commitment that he told us about though.
no, I know, I'm 5:30.
All right.
Or no,
5:45.
Yeah,
But let's not push it. If we get a little bit of a cushion, that's fine.
All right,
Here we are.
yes, sir.
all right, jury entering.
Jury's present and seated. Everyone else, like I said, this time, ladies and gentlemen, jury, welcome back. First question is, did any of you have any discussions related to the case, doing research related to the case, or be exposed to any reports of the case outside of the courtroom during the break? All right, no hands. Thank you all very much. We're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to turn to the state for cross-examination. Take your own.
Good afternoon, Dr. Heidi.
Hi, Mr. Terry.
Now, Dr. Heidi, you would agree with me that people who have suffered far worse abuse than Nicole Nachtman have not killed their parents. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
And the choice to kill her parents was her choice. She made that choice, correct? You said there were 3 choices she could make. You said she could either kill her mom, be killed by her mom, or kill herself, correct?
Mr. Terry, I think I said the word outcomes.
3 outcomes. So she had 3 outcomes. And her choice, she could make a choice of one of those outcomes in your mind, correct?
Well, let me, if I may, take a moment here.
Well, doctor, just tell me if that's right or wrong.
Judge, I asked that she be allowed to answer the question.
You do have an opportunity on redirect. It's leading questions, cross-examination.
So you're asking me, Counselor, if she had a choice? If you're.
In her mind, did she have a
Answer your list of
choice?
options, those were her choices, correct?
Yes, and I'd like to give an explanation. And the explanation is, if you look at it in the realm of, yes, were there choices? Yeah. But is this an individual who understands or who perceives herself as choices? So why I'm making this distinction is that she's in a hyper-aroused state. In other words, she's really not doing much thinking at all. What she's doing is reacting. So what she's aware of when she's in this panic state and basically very excited, and this is also related to brain development and age. Individuals who are 21 are not equivalent to adults. So the brain is not fully developed until individuals are between 23 and 25.
But you said
The
she's
last
not
area of the
21.
brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex.
You said
So what that means is that
emotionally
individuals are in
and
highly aroused
mentally
state, like
she's
Nicole-
not 21
Nicole
anyway.
was, that they can't stop, think, and deliberate. So that's the distinction I'm making here. She's not saying, well, I have this choice, or this choice. What she's aware of is there are three outcomes.
Okay, well, doctor, you were here in that exact same chair giving testimony in the proceeding, correct?
Yes,
And you were sworn in.
correct.
And in response to a question, because I'm just using your own words, and correct me if this doesn't sound right, but or if it doesn't reflect your recollection. You said in response to a question, yeah, it's never changed. And that's what's interesting. It's always been what I would call a delusion, but that her mom would have killed her. And Nicole saw it. Nicole saw it as three choices. Those were your words, three choices. She could kill herself, which she considered doing. So she thought about it. So she had a logical thought process. And at one point said she could sort of chickened out, I think was the word she used. So she could kill herself, she could be killed by her mother, or she could kill her mother. Those were your words, correct, doctor?
I don't know if I said part of what you just said, but if you look further in, okay, that's fine. Why don't you bring it to me? That would be good. But I also want to say that I do later on say outcomes is the correct one, so I'll find that for you. Yeah, so I have here, and I'm not, you added, I think, something. I said she saw it as three choices, and I did say she chickened out, but then I do, and if you'll give me a moment, I may have to look at mine, transcript, but I do come back and say it's more in terms of outcomes.
Okay, well, you can find out.
Okay, well, that, because it's an important distinction, and I corrected myself. So,
But at that point in time, though, you indicated she had three choices, and rather than choose suicide, because she said she thought about it and she chickened out, so she made a logical decision. I'm not gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill my mom.
no, I disagree, Counselor, and if you'll give me a moment, and I think I'm
No,
entitled
he's
to
not
show
gonna give you a
where I
moment.
did correct that.
Dr.
Am I not
Sure,
allowed to do that,
redirect.
Judge?
Well, I'll allow redirect.
Okay,
if,
because I know I have that in there where I corrected myself on outcomes.
Either
I
count.
understand, doctor, if you want to, but I'm trying to move this on, so
Or give her the opportunity on redirect.
I would, thank you.
Okay,
I'm just trying to move this along, doctor,
Right.
so.
I understand.
And you also indicated that the mother provided food, clothing, and shelter for Ms. Nachtman as she was growing up, correct?
That is correct, yes,
And the physical abuse you described, you would agree is limited. I think you've said that very many times.
I would agree.
And I'm sure most cases you see the physical abuse is far worse, or at least in these type of cases.
That is correct.
In fact, doctor, in your report, referring specifically to page 35,
Mhm.
you state on the bottom of 35 that the term battered child typically is used in the legal form in reference to a child who has endured extreme physical and or sexual abuse, correct? That's what you wrote in your
Yeah,
report.
that's usually how it's viewed, Counselor.
Correct. And then on page 36, you indicated as well that the acts reportedly perpetrated by Mrs. Steens, however, pale in comparison to the magnitude of physical abuse I have documented in many cases of parasite offenders. If these physically abusive acts were the only ones to which Nicole had been subjected, I would not characterize as a battered child. So as far as the physical abuse, it did not rise to the level of battered child.
I don't think one would make that determination simply on one aspect of that. So you've got to
I
consider the
understand that,
others.
Doctor. You explained that there were other factors, the physical or the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse. I'm just saying, as far as the physical abuse goes, it's so limited that you would not consider that particularly on its own to be battered child syndrome.
If that was it, yes,
Okay.
and, okay.
And the limited physical abuse you noted is all
She
self-reported.
does
from
not
the
like that.
Correct?
She
Yes,
likes
that's
to be able
correct.
to
There's no
explain.
police reports of any prior violence or any abuse to her, correct?
Not with respect to Nicole.
And there's no statement from any witnesses who observed any physical abuse to Nicole.
That is correct.
Okay, and there's no hospital records, statement from witnesses of bruising, et cetera, nothing like that.
That is correct.
And in all that self-reporting, does she ever say that her mom threatened to kill her in the past?
No, Nicole never made that representation that her mother in the past said that. That's correct.
And the stepfather, Mr. Deems, Robert Deems, there's no evidence whatsoever that he had physically abused her in any manner, correct?
That is correct.
And you would agree with me then, also that Ms. Nachtman is an intelligent individual with at least average or above average intelligence, correct?
I would agree with that.
All right, and I mean, obviously, we're getting to Florida State University, she had to make the grades, she had to pass the courses and do enough to get into college, correct?
I would agree with that.
early on, you indicated that there was repeated child abuse allegations, and that was between Miriam Deans and Robert Deans, right? They were both accusing each other of various instances of child abuse from the
You
family.
mean Ron Nachtman? Is
I'm
that
sorry, Ron Nachtman. I said Robert Deans. You're correct, Ron Nachtman.
Yeah, so I'm talking to, when I said there was acrimony and abuse allegations, the mother was making them against the biological father, and the father was making them against the mother, the biological father. So her parents were making allegations against each other. That is correct.
And that was back when she was 3 years old, correct?
About that, I'd have to check, but in that period.
And the physical abuse that you mentioned, the kicking, the slapping, things of that nature, none of that would rise to the level of criminal child abuse on the state of Florida, correct?
That I can't answer because I'm not an attorney. Now, I can only tell you what she represented, beating and kicking. I don't know as a state attorney if you would charge that. As a clinician, I consider that very serious.
Well, under Florida law,
I wouldn't object, that's outside this witness's expertise, but Florida law on the, whether someone's gonna be arrested or not.
I was just saying.
should we approach?
Yeah.
Doctor, you've given your, earlier talking about the physical abuse. Under the child abuse, and I'm gonna ask you if you are familiar with this or if you know this, that under the law in the state of Florida, it's not a crime for a parent of a child to impose reasonable physical discipline on a child for misbehavior under the circumstances, even though physical injury resulted from the discipline. Are you aware of that?
I haven't read the statute in a long time, that's true, but where we're maybe disagreeing is on what is reasonable.
Okay. One of the things you said you reviewed were the jail medical records of Nicole Nachtman, correct?
That is correct.
And the jail medical records show no indication of any diagnosis for any psychotic illness, isn't that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And at the jail, they had doctors, they had people who see the patient, see the people in jail and take care of them, correct?
That is correct.
And she's not being treated or being treated, she has not been treated or is being treated currently for any psychotic illness, correct?
That is correct. She is not being treated. She doesn't want treatment, and she's doing okay in a contained environment.
And she is currently not taking any medication for any psychotic illness, correct?
That is correct.
But why not?
You talked about the seeing signs, and specifically you mentioned the signs about the you're on the right, or your
That's
goals are
unusual.
almost met, or something like that, which she took as affirmation. And that came from Joseph Carey, correct? Or did she tell
I
that?
think she said it to me as well.
Well, when
I
she
mean, I
said
can look through my notes if you want. That's not a problem to have.
well, doctor, you're familiar with her path of travel during those 3 days, correct?
I believe I am, yes.
Yes, and it's your understanding and belief that she stayed in Tampa until the 21st, until after the murders, before she drove up to Tallahassee.
That is clearly my understanding and her representation from the beginning.
All right. But she, according to Joseph Carey, what she told him was she drove up to Tallahassee where she saw the signs and then drove back down to finish the job. So that was not true what she told him, was it?
That was his, I don't know, if that's what she said. That was clearly Joseph's or Joey's understanding. Nicole said to me that was inaccurate. So that's all I can tell you on that, counselor.
Okay. With regards to where you were indicating that going through Nicole Nachtman's childlike character and that her inability to function because she still was functioning in a childlike capacity, correct? You were discussing that earlier, correct?
A child or more childlike, yes.
And
That's correct.
it was your opinion, doctor, that she would not be able to function in college in that capacity because of her childlike ability.
Well, when I saw her, she was very impaired. And so it was clearly very difficult. And when I saw her, remember, she's in that severe state of mental decompensation. So I could not imagine, I've never seen a student functioning like that successfully in college.
Well, let me ask you, can a person with the mentality that you're kind of describing doctor a transcript with Photoshop in order to mislead the mother?
Yeah, and again, counselor, this is very important, and I really appreciate the question. There is a difference between personality development and intelligence. And I'm not saying that Nicole was not intelligent. I'm saying that her way of perceiving the world and thinking is like a child not wanting to get into trouble. Now, let me use a quick example because this will make it clearer. And I think it's important. I just want them
We
to
can't, you
understand.
answered my question. We need to move along, so I'm trying to just
Okay.
move this along.
But I also
Don't
want
be
you to
rude.
understand
Just
that's-
come
I
on.
think you explained it. I don't think we need an example at this moment. So I'm asking, and she was able
You don't have to be so
agree
rude.
that Nicole
Let the
Nachtman
poor
was able to
lady
get storage unit
explain.
on her own, correct?
She did get a storage
She was,
unit. I don't know if she had help or not. That I'm under oath. I can't tell you that if her friends, because I know Angelica said something about, I thought helping her, but I know she had a storage unit.
and she was able to travel to London on her own and live on her own in London for entire
There
semester,
again,
correct?
Counselor, I honestly don't know. She did go to London and she lived here. How the travel arrangements were made, I don't know. So
You would agree, doctor, that in order to travel to London, you have to get your passport, you have to go through customs, you have to go get your airline, you have to make your exchange at the airport, you have to go fly in, and then you're in a foreign country, you have to learn how to get to your hotel, how to manage your food, how to eat, how to drink. Basically, she did all that for a semester abroad, and you would agree she did that, correct?
no,
For a semester
I would
abroad.
not. What I want to just take exception, she may have done that. I'm only saying, I don't know. I would be surprised if she made all her travel arrangements from everything I've heard. I just don't see that happening. I think her mother would have been involved in that. Usually schools, when they go and you study abroad, you just don't go on your own. There are provisions made, there are dorm rooms booked. So you're making a lot of assumptions. You could be correct, but my experience says that that doesn't fit with the person I know and my experience as a college professor, that you just willy-nilly send these kids over to London and they fend for
willy-nilly.
themselves. That has not been my experience, Counselor.
All right, but you've not heard anything from anyone that there were any problems with the trip to London, that she had trouble meeting her plane, making her connection, getting through customs, getting her luggage there, any problems with any hygiene while she was in London, any problems getting her food, getting fed, doing what she needed to do, her classes, getting to her classes, her grades were good then. There's no indication of any problems with her in London for that time period, correct?
I can't agree with that totally. She did tell me that she wasn't eating properly. She didn't have a food plan. So she'd go on occasion to get free food. She'd go to Subway. So she wasn't eating real good meals. She did tell me she showered, and she also told me she felt the sense of freedom there. But typically in a situation like that, when you're abroad, there's going to be a containment for college students so they are successful. There's going to be some structure, Counselor, is what I'm saying.
Well, and then let me get closer to the time in question here. She was able to fill out a housing application on her own, which apparently she's been doing for a while because her mom, according to the testimony of her, never came up to help her move in. So she was able to get to class or get to school on her own, move in on her own. When it came to the housing application, granted, she was late, so that was the problem, and that's obviously the impetus for the whole thing.
Judge, I'm gonna object to the form of the question. I think
Let's
it's 3 and 1.
let's break it up.
I'll bring it down to one thing. She was able to take care of that situation, the mess she had created for herself, get the housing application in, filled out, get it approved, communicate with Florida State, get the money to Florida State, scan it.
Form of the question.
Judge, I'm going through the list of things she did, and I'm asking her if she was able to do all of that.
So it's compounded.
Well, it's very compound and you need to settle down,
That's gonna take a
sir.
while. So she was able to get the housing application she needed, correct?
You're talking about subsequently,
Correct,
I would think so, yes. The evidence suggests she borrowed the money and apparently got the room.
correct. And she filled out the application, she got it in, she scanned it, however, she emailed it, correct? You know, you've
As
seen.
far as I
it.
know, I haven't seen it, but she did get the room. I'll agree with that, yes.
The things that she said her mom said to her, specifically the overweight, skank, retard, those things were again self-reported, correct?
That is correct. I don't think I heard anybody say they heard that language directed towards Nicole. They heard language like that in reference to them, but not to Nicole.
Now, you mentioned earlier that, and it was, I hadn't heard before, but that she attempted suicide with pills. Is there any evidence of that other than what she told you? I mean, is there any evidence of a Baker Act, a hospital stay, anything that whether it was
Not
medical
that I'm aware of.
intervention?
I did not see anything. That is self-reported.
So that is a self-report. Now, also earlier, doctor, you were kind of describing her sudden grade drop, and you seem to constantly equate irresponsibility with drinking or smoking, and that's usually or is the reason why people's grades drop and they fail to succeed in college. But there's other types of irresponsibility that causes grades to drop. Would you agree?
There could be.
Someone could just plain be lazy and not want to go to classes and do the work that needs to be done. Would that be accurate?
I would agree.
That's
That
very
is what
true.
happened.
And someone could just be, you talk about drinking, someone could just be, as you claim she may be, addicted to her computer, enjoying her computer, wanting to be in that world, wanting to type and not doing her classes, but rather would stay on the computer. That could be a reason why her grades are dropping as well, correct?
Well, I would agree that that's what happened. The flight into fantasy, yes.
Correct. Now, you administered 2 tests that she got some high scores on to support a diagnosis of PTSD, the trauma symptom inventory and the dissociative experience
Right.
Scale.
Uh-huh.
Now,
Yes.
both of those tests, they're both self-report instruments, correct?
That's correct.
And so Nicole could magnify those, correct?
That's why I discussed the validity scores. I had 8 of them, and what they showed is that she was not what's called faking good or faking bad. They were accurate. And those were with respect to the TSI-2. That's very important because you want to know that they're reporting accurately. So the test builds that in. Now the DES, the Dissociative Experience Scale, does not have a validity score built in. However, this is important, her results were completely consistent with the trauma symptom inventory results. They were consistent with what the school had reported, was in the school records. They were consistent with what she had reported. They were consistent with what her college friends had reported and what the family had reported in terms of the dissociation. So you always want to look for that corroborative data.
I understand. Now, doctor, as part of the material you looked at, did you ever get the email exchanges, or I'm sorry, text message exchanges that took place on Nicole Nachtman's phone? Did you ever review those?
I saw some, I think. I'm not sure if you could tell me what you're referring to.
Well, specifically, doctor, I'm referring to all of them because there's a number of exchanges between the defendant in this case and the mother, Miriam Deans. I wonder if you had a chance to review those exchanges between them and if you have any opinion about that.
I'm not sure which ones. When you say extensive, I did see some right around the time of the shootings with the mom appeared to me to be checking in. I don't think I saw extensive email contacts between the mother. I think I saw a few. That's my recollection, counselor. And that would have been around the time of the incident.
Now, I'm going to just point out a few of these and ask if it agrees with your opinion of Nicole Nachtman and the relationship she has with Miriam Deans. And so I'll, and again, doctor, if you tell me if you remember these, because I don't see anywhere in your list of stuff that you had reviewed that you had said you reviewed these. Specifically going to the top of page 379 is a text received from Nicole from Miriam Deans, her mom. And it says, "Sorry, honey, we'll get it to your bank tonight." And then down here on the bottom is the response from Nicole Nachtman, "No worries." And then she also sends, because everything that says sent went from her phone. She says, "No worries, take your time, just mainly no, low, nothing serious." And the response back from Miriam Deans, "Money in the bank. Let me know you got it, and let me know if there's more problems with the roommate." You see those?
Yes.
Did you review these texts?
I had not seen those.
And on page 392, again, text between Nicole Nachtman and Miriam Deans. And then here's where she says, "No, that is just when classes end." And then the response from Miriam Deans, "No seats on Saturday, just checked." And then the response from Nicole, "Just let me drive down." And her response, "I said no, Bob says the car needs maintenance, so besides safety, I don't want you stranded." You review those in the course of your.
No, but are those in reference to the spring break? Is that what it's about? I had not seen those.
I mean, obviously,
It
they're not
appears
going to
that
pick
she's
out
trying to get down. Her
text
mom's concerned
messages
for her
that are
safety in driving the vehicle. Correct?
confrontational.
With a little bit that I saw, that's the inference I would make, and it seems like it's around spring break. I'm just trying to put a context in, counselor, so I can understand it. That's,
I just asking if you reviewed it.
no, I did not see those.
Do those texts sound like the mother you've been describing and the relationship that you've been describing of a woman who's scared of her mother to death and a woman who has a horrible relationship with her mother, or and a mother who doesn't care about her daughter? Or does it sound?
Objection to the form of the question?
Well, rephrase, but first put the exhibit number on the
Yes,
record, please.
sorry, Your Honor, that was fixed exhibit number 7.
Okay, go ahead and rephrase the question.
Judge, I'll move on.
I can respond to the question.
It's okay. Let's move ahead to the murders in this case, both of Robert Deans and Miriam Deans. And actually, let's go specifically to the murder of Miriam Deans, because that's where your testimony regarding battered child syndrome applies as far as her. So it's just, it only applies to her case, correct? You understand that?
I do. I understand that's court ruling.
Right. So, and it applies to the self-defense instruction. Are you aware of the self-defense instruction?
I'm aware of the self-defense instruction in general. I think I know Florida law, but I haven't looked at it in a while.
Now, I want to go specifically to what Ms. Nachtman told you about the moments before she shot her mother. Can you go through that, what she told you about that?
What specifically?
Yes. What she said was that she was just trying to decide basically what to do. She was thinking of, and I want to go back to that time, so that's why I'm pausing.
Just if you can, just to the point where she decides to leave the house when the mom comes in, she chickens out or whatever and goes out the window. Describe what Nicole described to you, how the actions occur.
Councilor, I'll answer your question, but I want the moment to think about it because it's
That's fine.
important to recollect my thoughts.
Absolutely.
Counselor,
Thank
be
All right,
quiet. Give her a
what
minute.
She told me was that she's trying to, basically, she's in this state of panic. She talks about, should she tell her mom? And she's kind of thinking that she'd tell her mom, and her mom, she somehow thinks that
Like-
her mother can fix this. And that she's saying, well, she'd tell her mom, and what she's concerned about, as she says, is that her mom will, I use the word coo, but will say to her, sweetie, you can tell me anything. And then she said, I'll tell her what happened. And then she uses the expression, I'll sing like a canary. And then mom will take the gun if she has it. No, she'll talk me out of the gun and then she'll shoot me. So she's trying to decide, should she take mom in? She's wrestling with, she says at one point, if mom can't keep a secret, and she's talking now about the iPad, and she's saying, like, if mom couldn't help me with something like that, can I trust her to help me with something like this? And she's talking about the death of Bob.
you. Doctor, let me, maybe I misstated my question. I guess.
I thought you wanted to know what she was thinking,
No,
Councilor.
not what she was, not what she was thinking. That's why I said, I must have misstated, so forgive me, let me rephrase it, okay, so I can say it exactly right.
That's what you
Before
said,
she killed her
sir.
Mom, describe the actions that were taking place, what she observed, what she decided to do at the moment she decided to do it, what her mom was doing. I want to hear that at the moment she shot her.
All right, but what I was saying was relevant, at least in my thinking, because it talks about what she's doing. So she's having this kind of thinking process with herself. Then she's surprised. It's like her mother, she hears her mother in the house. That's what she reports. And it kind of caught her off guard because she didn't expect the mother. And she panics because now it's that moment where she could talk her mother in or whatever. And she says she panics and she goes out her, I believe it's her bedroom window. And she runs, she takes the gun because she's afraid that her mother, as she reports, will shoot her. She runs to what I presume is the front of the house where the driveway is. She runs unexpectedly into the mother. Apparently the door of the house is open. Her mother may have been in, but she runs into the mother. The mother says reportedly again, excuse my language, what the fuck are you doing here? And Nicole said, and she shot her. And I think she said her mother screamed or yelled or both, and she shot her again. And a total, I believe, of 3 times. So that's what she reported to me.
All right, thank you, doctor. And so she never indicated to you that the mother made any aggressive actions towards her, in any sort of movements towards her, in any way physical.
She did not report that her mother in any way was physically aggressive. She was verbally aggressive, but that's nothing physically aggressive.
And so she reported no physical assault or any aggressive movement towards her at the moment she shot her mother.
That's my understanding.
Verbally aggressive. What the fuck
Doctor,
are you doing here?
I believe you and I might have a little difference on this, but I want to go straight to what you stated to me back on January 9th this year of 2019, almost 4 years since the murder, in which I asked you, this was a hearing regarding the battered child syndrome. At one point in the hearing, because your report does not indicate that you made any sort of a diagnosis of insanity, does it?
No, I wasn't. I don't recall being asked to do that, but I did not make a diagnosis of it. I did not make a diagnosis of it.
Okay, and at one point in the proceedings, when I'm talking to you and you're giving me a description of her schizotypal personality disorder, and I'm going to read these lines to you and your responses, and then we'll get into that. But I asked you, and this was a question for me, but doctor, you were not opining, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read your report. You were not opining that she did not know what she was doing at the time, and she did not know right from wrong. And you responded, that's correct, I'm not opining that. And I said, so she would not fit under the McNaughton standard of insanity, correct? And you said, that is correct.
Yes, and then I said in reviewing the jury instructions, which I've done subsequently, that's where I saw or its consequences. And that's why I have come up with a different conclusion. in my report, and I can point to it in several places, I do talk about not knowing the seriousness or appreciating the consequences. So that is why there appears to be a change. You were on McNaughton, and that's what I answered, and the jury instructions are broader than that. And your question, Counselor, specifically says right from wrong, and I have the page number 2.
But Doctor, I've heard it, but let me ask you this, okay? You've now told the court or the jury, the McNaughton standard, but it's true in fact that Florida, in these instructions were based on the McNaughton rule, correct?
Absolutely, I agree with that.
And citing to a Supreme Court of Florida case, and I'll give you the case site for you so you're aware of it. Patton v. State, 878 Southern 2nd 368, a Supreme Court of Florida case from 2004. And this is from the Supreme Court, in which they stated, the legal test for insanity in Florida in criminal cases has long been the McNaughton rule.
Judge, is there a question?
I'm going to read this to her, Judge, and ask her if this is what she understands the law to be.
He's now Judge Weaver.
So Dr. Hyde, I'm going to go ahead and show you this case, and specifically headnote 7. And I'm asking you to read that paragraph. Right there.
You just want me to read those like 2 or 3 sentences or the whole paragraph?
Just a paragraph.
Oh, all right, hold on. Okay.
All right. Doctor, does that paragraph explain what the McNaughton rule is in Florida?
Yes, but that's not how you phrased it to me, Mr. Terry.
All right, but it does, doesn't it? And according to the Supreme Court of Florida, the McNaughton rule states consequences in it, does it not?
Right, but that's not what you asked me, sir. And I went by your representation, and often the McNaughton rule doesn't have or its consequences in the first prong. So
That's
that's
what the McNaughton rule changes?
no, but the point is that, and again,
That's
I'm
not
not
what
saying
you
that
asked me,
changes,
Mr.
but
Terry.
oftentimes it's phrased as didn't know what you were doing, or if you didn't, or you did know that you didn't know it was wrong. So I have seen it represented that way. That is my understanding of it, or my recollection, let me put it that way. The way you said it to me, and if you look at what you said, was abbreviated, which is what I just referenced to you. Sure if what they were doing or it was wrong, and I agreed on that premise. The only thing we're having a distinction now is you are inserting based on the Supreme Court or its consequences. That's what the jury said, and that is not what you asked me. I put in my report consequences, so that's what I'm making reference to.
Doctor, I said the McNaughton standard, correct?
You did, sir.
Right.
But you
It
didn't
was
state it
followed-
correctly then if that was your understanding of it. That's my point.
Have you ever been hired as an expert on insanity in the state of Florida?
Yes.
So when I was asking you those questions, you didn't ask me, well, are you referring to Florida insanity, McNaughton standard that's different, that doesn't say consequences? You didn't ask me none of that.
I went by what you said, Counselor, and what you specifically said was she didn't know what she was doing or it was wrong. And that's what I answered. You said under McNaughton, I assumed you were quoting it correctly, and so that's what I went with.
And according to that Supreme Court decision, McNaughton states consequences,
Ask
correct?
an answer.
Right, and I answered.
Objection, ask an
Let's
answer.
move on.
So you misquoted it, and now you're trying to impeach her on what
So let's
she
get
said
into that,
because you misquoted it.
statement here, Doctor.
And now she's trying to correct you, and you
You
don't
didn't
like
get
it.
mental infirmity, disease, or defect, and because of the condition, she did not know what she was doing, and you said, no, she knew what she was doing. She knew she was shooting people, correct?
I think she knew that she had a gun and that she was shooting, yeah.
And then your quibbles with the consequences were, what is the immediate consequences of shooting a person?
Well, normally.
Great
you would
bodily
think with a
harm
rational
or death.
person That shooting somebody would lead to physical harm, possibly serious injury or death. When I was looking at consequences, when I got reviewing the jury standard or the jury instructions, I was also considering, did she consider the seriousness of this offense appreciated? And that's why
Or the
I said,
consequences.
if I take into consequences, and I already testified, she had no understanding of how serious this was, and for almost 2 years, she kept thinking that her mom, in fact, even longer than that, could influence the outcome, which kind of leaves me wondering, again, did she quite get, her mother was dead, and I have it right in my notes, and it's in the report, when she finally said, my mother is dead, but still kind of thought her mother somehow could impact the outcome. So that makes me kind of think Does she really get this whole thing about consequences?
So doctor, you're extending the word consequences from the immediate action. So the action of doing the shooting, the consequences of shooting someone are what, doctor? Just the immediate consequences of shooting a gun into a person.
To a rational person, the immediate consequences would be serious, I mean, if you hit them, serious physical injury or death.
Do you believe that Nicole Nachtman knew when she shot that gun into the back of Robert Dean's head, she knew that she would kill him?
I don't, should she have known? Did she know? And I'm only saying this because I don't know that she is, again, you have to remember, this is somebody who's panicky. When she does shoot him, she sees he's on the floor, and she even considers for a minute when, I don't know if he's making noise or what he's doing, but she's even considering he's faking. So again, it leaves you with that question. It's almost like, again, a child.
Well, she knew that she could put the gun to her head and kill herself. She knew that when she shoots a projectile, she could kill someone, correct?
I would say
Fair.
yes, in that sense.
Okay, so in shooting a gun, you know that you can kill someone. Those are the direct consequences of shooting a gun at a person. Would you not agree? Direct consequences. We can sit here and discuss consequences beyond all the way till the moon. But the direct consequences of that action of pulling the gun is to kill someone, correct?
If you're saying direct to a rational person, yes, it would be to cause serious injury or death. I'm answering your question.
Okay, I'm not saying rational. Did she know that when she shot him, she was going to kill him? That he would die, or most likely die? She's a Florida State student. She watches horror movies. She's familiar with guns.
Objection to the form of the question. He asked the question and didn't let her answer.
Did she not know that in shooting this man, she would hurt him or kill him?
I mean, she does watch horror
In
movies.
some
so
respects,
she's
it's hard to
familiar
know
with
what her
that.
thinking is. If you're saying natural consequence, I think you said it direct. The answer you would think would be yes, she's panicked and she shoots him. So exactly what's going on in her mind, I don't know, but that's what I meant. That's the only reason that I'm hesitating there.
All right. Well, doctor, you said all along that in her mind, she had three choices.
I said three outcomes and I did find it for you. Now, I
Okay.
hope I didn't.
All right,
lose
three
it.
outcomes, and that's fine. Either way.
It's on page 239, that's when I corrected myself. So I just want to make that distinction. It's not like she's sitting there and going, well, I could do this and deliberating and going, or I could do this. It's sort of like she's aware of it. You've got to remember, she's in a when I say hyper aroused state, she's panicked, she's terrified. She can't figure this out. And you can't separate that from the mental illness.
All right, doctor. So going back to the original question, and speaking and having heard your options, or what did you call it? The
Outcomes.
She knew that one of the outcomes was killing her mother.
That could occur, yes.
Okay. And that's why she had the gun.
Well, I can tell you what she told me. She told me she had the gun because she was afraid her mother would kill her. She took the gun. So
Now, was she afraid that her
could
mother
not
was
use
going
it
to kill her
against
because she
and
killed
she
Robert,
was-
or
jumped
because
over
of all
out
of the
window
things at
and ran
school
into her
and the
mother.
things that she fucked up on? Because now I'm confused. Because I could see now if she
So
was
the
scared that her
original
mom
question,
could kill
Did she
her
know when she shot a
because
person that she could
of
kill her?
Robert,
Simple.
or
You take a gun,
because
you shoot someone, you can kill
of
that
the
person.
school
Would you not agree that she did know that? Simple fact. I mean, just by the fact you said she's of average intelligence, she would know the purpose of a gun and what it can be used for, correct?
You're saying based on intelligence, yes, of course you know that.
I'm gonna have a moment, Your Honor.
Yeah.
No further questions.
Redirect.
no more questions.
Mr. Terry just asked you questions about
A lot of mean questions. Well, he was,
whether
He
there were
was
any
real rough.
witnesses to the physical abuse that Nicole reported.
and he
You
didn't
recall
have
that
to be so
question?
I
mean.
do.
And in typical battered child cases or abuse cases, do abusers typically batter their victims in front of a room full of people?
Not typically. I mean, on occasion it happens with other family members if they're present in the
I think
home.
you've asked
but
that
nobody was
question
present
already.
in
And
this home.
after Nicole was about 3, isn't it in fact true, Joey, Kevin, everybody's out of the home by that point?
Clearly Joey's out of the home.
Do you
I
recall what
think-
year Kevin passed away?
It was, just give me a minute, it was around 2004, but I believe he lived with a father who was a different father, that's Joseph's father, Mr. Carey. I could be wrong there, but I think he did live for a period with Mr. Carey.
Mr. Terry asked you whether this was the most severe case of physical abuse that you'd ever seen, and you indicated that most cases you worked on,
That's not the question.
Nope.
that this
This
was
is-
not.
It's the question.
Instruct the jury to rely on their own recollection. Rephrase it.
Mr. Terry was referencing that this case was not one of the most severe cases of abuse that you'd ever seen. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you in fact
Of
documented,
physical abuse, yes.
and you in fact documented that that was in fact true previously, correct?
Yes, it's in my report.
However, in your 30+ years as a college professor, have you ever seen anyone so impaired at the age of Nicole Nachtman at the time of these offenses than you do in this case?
I would be hard pressed to say that I have. And now you have to remember, Nicole is not only 21, she's close to 25.
So would you be more inclined to say that Nicole has a mental impairment?
Mr.
And a
Terry asked you if
developmental
anywhere in the jail
disability, and
records,
she's
jail medical
more
staff ever
on the
diagnosed
spectrum of
Nicole with any
something
type of
else,
psychotic
then she
disorders, and I
would
believe
be-
your answer was no.
Not psychosis per se. In the record, there is some reference that she reported when asked the auditory hallucinations, the screaming, and that was on admission. She did report that.
How many total hours did you spend with Nicole Nachtman over the last 4 years, evaluating her and doing clinical interviews of her?
It would have been about 35 hours. Now, that's over the course of 4 years, or almost 4, 3.5.
And is your diagnosis of schizophrenia, your belief that she was suffering from delusions and that she was psychotic on the date of the offense, all based on you spending those 35 hours with her in addition to the records and the data that you've reviewed in this case?
Yes,
Really
and
not
it's
that long.
also based on, and I want to make this part of the record, a very careful analysis and going back through all those clinical interviews. Because when you give a diagnosis, a clinician gives a diagnosis of schizophrenia, it's a very serious diagnosis. So it's important to have the data that support it. Psychotic break was always evident to me and I believe
give
to others.
Diagnosis
But to
with
establish that
schizophrenia
diagnosis,
off
you
of an
need to have
hours.
evidence of those symptoms, and we talked about that. I went through with the delusions are ongoing, the signs, the referential signs are ongoing, the problems with the disordered thought and speech are ongoing, the problems with the hygiene are ongoing, the problems with forming relationships are ongoing. The test data is showing that she has problems with relationships. So that's all very important, Counselor, Mrs. Hersey.
Mr. Terry also asked you about the tests that you administered to Ms. Nachtman, one being the trauma symptom inventory. And you in fact indicated that that test specifically has validity scores that indicate Ms. Nachtman was not faking when she was responding to those, despite that having been a self-report test.
Yes, and that's very important. Again, that's a very good test, very well respected. So we have 4 indications on that test alone that she was, meaning there are 2 validity scores, faking good, faking bad on 2 tests. So 2 times 2 equals 4 measures of validity, which would say she's not faking, malingering, lying. She's reporting her symptoms accurately.
Mr. Terry showed you 2 text messages from Miriam Deans indicating that she was possibly putting money at some point in Nicole Nachtman's bank account. Do you recall those text messages he showed you?
Yes.
Does the fact that Miriam Deans was putting money in Nicole's bank account change your opinion as to whether she suffered psychological abuse at the hands of her mother?
No, absolutely not.
Do 2 text messages indicating that her mother put money in her bank change your opinion as to whether you think she suffers from battered child syndrome?
No, not at all.
And in fact, did you testify earlier today that there's no dispute that Miriam Deans bought things from Nicole, provided shelter, sent her to college, bought her a car, correct? You never disputed that fact.
No, and I would just add that that came up repeatedly in my interviews, that the mom did buy her stuff, but Nicole felt she held it over her, held it against her, and she got to the point she didn't want her mom to buy her stuff anymore.
Does the fact that Miriam Deans was providing food, shelter, and a college education to Nicole Nachtman in any way diminish the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother?
No, not at all.
No, not at all.
Doctor, I want to give you the opportunity to tell the jury at that hearing Mr. Terry asked you about as to what your testimony was with regard to outcomes versus choices. You tried to do that several times, so I'm going to give you the time to do that.
This is
Because
on
he wouldn't
page-
let you talk because he was being a bully.
Page 239, and Mr. Terry's correct, I did use the word choices. Then I said, this is 2 paragraphs, probably could say she doesn't see herself as having choices. And so she would say that the killing of her mom just happened. She also said the same thing about Bob. Also said the same thing, I believe, to Dr. Lazaro. Okay, going back to my testimony. So you and I know there were choices. I'm talking to Mr. Terry. So you and I know there were choices, but when you come down to, I guess what I'm saying here, she saw there were 3 outcomes. So she wasn't deliberating well. Here's what I could do. I could, meaning like, in terms of making a conscious decision, but clearly there were 3 outcomes. And that's really what I want to emphasize, that she recognized and believed in.
And is that testimony about outcomes consistent with what you told this jury today?
Absolutely.
Well, he didn't want you to say that. That did not fit his narrative.
With regard to your opinion on consequences, the insanity jury instruction, do you recall how long your testimony was at that hearing we referenced in January of this year with regard to battered child syndrome?
My recollection is it was about 4 hours.
And in those 4 hours, the only 2 questions reference your thoughts on McNaughton or insanity.
Oh,
Dr. Heidi, that hearing back in January, you indicated a moment ago, was about 4 hours long.
they
I
won.
think it was at least 4 hours long.
At least your
Great one.
testimony.
I think so.
And you'd agree that the
Yeah, this
focus,
is my testimony, right, because it did go all day.
and you'd agree the focus of that hearing was the battered child syndrome and the history of abuse that Nicole had endured.
That was my understanding.
And the questions that Mr. Terry asked you about McNaughton and the wrongfulness of Ms. Nachtman's actions, as we've noted in his questioning to you, was about 2 questions in that 4-hour hearing.
Yes.
Were you deposed by Mr. Terry in this case?
No, I was not.
And a deposition is an opportunity for lawyers, I'm sure you've been deposed in your history, to ask questions and have experts or people expound on things, and that was not done, correct?
Correct.
And in
Yes.
fact, you authored a 52-page report in this case dating back to 2018.
That's correct, yes, October 2018.
And again, the report does not address insanity, but the focus of the report was the battered child syndrome and the abuse that Nicole Nachtman endured, correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Can I approach and borrow that jury instruction again?
Sure.
Yes.
If I can find it. I might have misplaced it. Give me just a moment. Sorry. It might be right here. You know, I read it.
I wonder what her desk looks like at her office.
Here it is, Mrs. Hurston.
Thank
you. You're welcome.
She's super smart. She's a smart lady.
Your opinion as to prong 1 has always been that Nicole Nachtman suffered a mental infirmity, disease, or defect, correct?
Yes, from the
I think-
very beginning.
The important thing to note about this instruction is the very first sentence. Can you read that for the jury?
Yes, here it is, I'm sorry. The person is considered,
An issue in this case.
oh, okay. An issue in this case is whether Nicole Nachtman was insane when the crime allegedly was committed.
So this instruction specifically deals with at the time of the offense, correct?
Correct, that's what I'm reading, yes.
And you've never wavered on number 1.
She has a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. No, I've always said that.
And so when you go to number 2, when you answered Mr. Terry's question at that hearing about McNaughton, is it fair to say that you were referring to prong B, that Nicole Nachtman knew that murdering somebody was wrong?
Yes. However, Mr. Terry did say, he didn't give me the whole instruction is what I'm saying.
Okay. And so
Okay,
now, as you sit
yeah.
here today, after having reviewed this instruction and knowing Nicole Nachtman as you do, having spent over 35 hours with her, have you always believed that she did not understand the consequences of what had occurred in August of 2015 when she killed her mother and her stepfather?
Yes.
If I can have a moment?
Yes.
No moment.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi.
Free cross.
Dr. Heidi, Ms. Percival just mentioned that I only asked you 2 questions at that hearing regarding insanity, correct?
That's my recollection, Counselor. I can go check it. I got it.
But in fact, at that time, on January of 2019, insanity was not even an issue in this case. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that at least as far as that hearing that we were focusing.
So the fact that I only asked you 2 questions would make sense when insanity was not even an issue in the case at that time, correct?
I don't know that I could determine that. That sounds more like a legal question for me.
Okay, thank you.
Read the
Yes,
rest.
sir.
All right, so this witness the excuse.
Yes.
Am I mistaken?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Make step down, give the excuse as a witness.
Well,
Thank you.
Oh,
what
that box, yes.
was
Go
that?
down absolutely and help her
Thank you.
carry her stuff.
Thank you, Judge.
Since we- I don't know if we take a recess.
Do you need a brief recess?
Do we need a brief recess?
Clear out of my stuff.
As soon as we clear the witness stand, I'll allow you to call your next witness. It's all right. Don't, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to stand up in case Rex breaks while we're doing that, you're absolutely welcome to do that.
Thank you very much, Judge.
Watch your step on the way out.
Okay, well, that was fun. We're going to get into some more doctor testimony. Jiminy Christmas. So I wonder what the defense was before. What was it before if it wasn't insanity? Was it just self-defense? What were they doing? Now I'm curious. Huh. Because normally if you're going to do the insanity defense, like you do that right out the gate. And now they're just trying to piece it together and trying to play the insanity card. That makes a whole lot of sense. And you pulled that out. That's why it doesn't make sense. That's why it's fishy. That's why it's weird sounding. That's why I don't buy it. And again, that's why I would say, like, some of the pieces fit, but not all of the pieces fit. Yeah. All right, y'all. Like, subscribe, comment, do all of the things. And I will come back with another doctor testimony to hear more of these bitchy defense lawyers. And that's the first time I've heard the state get real bitchy. Like, the lady's a little bitchy, but I've never heard the man get real bitchy. Like, not that I can recall anyway. And he was real bitchy with this lady, and this lady was super nice, and that was upsetting. I didn't like that. She wasn't mean either. Like, she was not a hostile witness at all. Like, let the lady explain. Like, she's not hurting your case really at all. And ugh. I cannot. I just did not. I did not appreciate him. Not even a little bit. Okay. So we are going to call it a day here. And see you all next time. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Get it out there, yo. Okay, bye.